Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Ihsan.
And I'm Eric Mertz.
And this is episode 68 of the podcast, and it is May 19th, 2022, as we record this. Today, we're talking about pacing. In your And this podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. For as low as $1 a month, you can get a shout out on the podcast. We can make announcements for you. Other tiers include free books, accountability calls, scene analysis, mastermind calls, and a whole slew of other things. So become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. I finished 2 books last night and started another one. I remember when I was telling you, I read so many at the same time that sometimes I just have this slew of finishing energy and I finish a whole bunch of books at once. So that felt really good. That was yesterday.
Which books did you finish? Which ones? Remind us.
I was reading Red Paint, which is that native memoir by Sasha LaPointe. There's another name in there that's native that I can't pronounce.
Right.
But that was really moving and good and beautiful language. I just, it inspired me to not take my memoir in a different direction at all, but to just spend some time on that depth of language, which I love to read and, of course, want to emulate. And then the other one that was super great, it actually might be a fun case study for today's conversation. It's called Meet Me in Another Life by Catriona Silvey. I think Catriona is how you pronounce it. She's Scottish. But anyway, it was these people keep meeting together, life after life after life after life. And we'll get into it during the pacing conversation.
Okay.
At any rate,
spoilers.
Yeah, that was really super great book. In fact, I'm going to see if I can get it for the bookstore so that we can carry it as a staff pick. It was really, really good.
Cool.
And then what else? Oh, I started reading Seven Steeples, which is a novel by Sarah Baum, who's an Irish writer. So.
You finished 2 books and then started another.
Yes.
That's a rare feat. That can't happen often.
Well, when you finish a book, you kind of want to sit with it and let it, ruminate and, swim in you reflect on it. What did I learn from it and how do I feel? But there were several spaces in my evening. I didn't want to watch. So I don't want to watch so much TV. So I had set aside last night. I'm not going to turn on the TV. I'm just going to read. So I was in the hot tub when I finished one book. So then I was able to sit and kind of wow, and think about it a little bit. And then I had dinner and I picked up the other book, the memoir that I had started before the library book snuck in. That's what that was, the library book.
Yeah.
So then I went back to the memoir and was reading that. And I finished reading that in bed. I just climbed into bed after dinner, really, and just got all snuggly with the dogs all around me and a glass of wine and finished reading that book. So then I was able to really lay there and ruminate on that one. And I did have another book with me and I was thinking, do I want to start it? It is kind of late. I do want to, so I picked it up and I read a couple of paragraphs, but then I was like, no, I still need to spend time with this other one, so I closed that up and I just laid there and thought about the memoir some more until I fell asleep.
We should retitle this podcast The Life, because you just described every reader's life. I finished a book in the hot tub and it just sounds like a great evening.
It was fabulous. Dinner. I really got rejuvenated. I enjoy TV and it's a thing that I do with my husband. We pick stuff to watch together and we talk about what we watch and it's time spent together. We're not actively talking to each other. Well, actually my husband does.
No, right. My wife
actively talks to with our shows. I've come to terms with it. He's also, I swear, he's never taken the strengths test, but he must be number one input too, because he stops shows and looks up on Wikipedia, what this thing's about, the characters. We're watching Inventing Anna right now, the one about the German socialite, whatever. Yeah. So he's looking up on Wikipedia about her and don't say anything. I don't want to know anything about this.
It's really funny because you just described me back to me. That's exactly what I do. Lisa will like, what are you looking at over there? And I'll say, no, nothing. Don't worry. I'm just nothing big. But now that habit's been sort of migrated to her. I'll see her, beat me to the punch on things like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I love TV. It's like I love good television. I mean, I'm hooked on the things I'm hooked on, but I think it's important to maybe plan a night away from it. You kind of have
That's
to
what
do
I
that.
had to do finally, because I was getting a little bit ridiculous, because we would start binging on stuff and then we would watch
Right.
like 2 or 3 episodes of the thing, that night or whatever, and do that like every night. It's
We've been
kind of soul
watching,
sucking.
yeah, we've been watching Under the Banner of Heaven, that the Hulu true crime series based on the John Krakauer book, but they're
Oh,
putting them out once a week, so
oh.
it's keeping us honest. It's every
I'm gonna have to check that out, because we still have Hulu. Every week we threaten to get rid of one of our streaming services and we can't decide which one it is. So we never do.
oh.
What are you reading?
Well, now remember last week when I said that
Oh
I
yes, the
had picked
big
up
tome.
The Doorstop? The day that I picked that book up, I get a notice from the library that Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony
Oh,
Doerr
another
showed up.
tome. Oh my God.
Yeah, so in that I thought, well, look, there's a huge line for it at the library. So I did the timing, right? If I've got a week to pick it up, and then so anyway, I went and picked this book up, and I've wanted to read that because I loved All the Light We Cannot See. I thought that was, I finished that book in 4 days. I haven't put away a big book like that fast since college.
I am really interested to hear what you have to say about that novel after you're done reading it, because of what you
Cloud Cuckoo
say
Land.
about, because of what you've said about All the Light We Cannot See.
I will be interested to talk about those two books in contrast, because I am a third of the way through Cloud, and it's I was talking to
Totally different.
totally different book.
And the
It's night
things
and day.
about, I'm afraid to read Cloud Cuckoo Land. I work in the
Really?
bookstore. It's right there all the time. Other
It's
people
staring.
staring at me. And, we had a slew of people buy it in the when it came out. And, I have staff members, colleagues, that have read it.
Right.
And the things that I'm reading on the back of the jacket are the things I don't tend to like about novels, so I haven't wanted to read it because of the epic scope and because of the multiple points of view. Like it appears from the book jacket anyway, that there are going to be a lot of characters and it goes through a huge amount of time. And I don't really like those epic saga drawn out for centuries of time kind of books. So
I like them spare. I mean, we'll have that conversation when I'm done,
Okay.
which will probably be next week. I love those stories if there's a compelling reason for why are we doing this? Why are we in this storytelling mode? I haven't figured out what that is in this book yet. I get swept into it because the description and what's going on is very interesting. Like there was just a 20-page chapter involving like a prison camp in the Korean War, which was just so interesting and so vivid. But then I was left at the end of it saying, well, I don't know how this connects to the Ottoman Empire in the 14th century or 15th century.
I'm so glad we're talking about pacing today, Eric.
Yeah, I am too. Like when I realized that was the topic and I had this book in my hand, I thought, okay, well, I'll have some fodder for the conversation. So that book's I'll probably be done by next week. But then I also I decided to go on a Charles Bukowski kick. So I think the Big Doorstop fantasy novel just got kicked down it got right up to the top of the ladder. It was good. It was ready to be read. And then like 3 books showed up in the mail and 1 from the library. And now it's back down again. Yeah.
Down the line.
Fall. I'll see you in the fall.
That'll be a nice, cozy hot chocolate read.
That'll be a subplot for the summer podcast. Like, when will Eric actually pick up that book is it ever gonna? Oh, and I also picked up at one of the little libraries in our neighborhood. I picked up Sarah Moss, those the Court of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, those books. There were like 3 of them in one little library. They were brand new.
Wow.
And I was walking, it was about to rain. This is Sunday. This is really funny. This is the nerd scene. Someone was filming it. They're going to put it up. Like I look in the little library and I open the door and I'm like, there's 3 books in the same series and they're brand new. And I've wanted to read these. And I'm looking around for like when I'm going to get punked, like who's going to come running out of the bushes so I grab them, and I'm like, okay, now I'm walking the dog and I've got this stack of books in my hand and it's like blustery and rainy, getting ready to, and I'm covering the books like with one arm and the dog is like, what are you doing? This isn't right. It was the perfect nerdy Portland book guy scene. It was so great. It was in some episode of Portlandia that I haven't seen yet.
That is hilarious. That's so perfect.
It was and I come in the door and Elijah's like, where did you go to the bookstore? Why didn't you take me? I'm like, no, these were from a little library. And no fair. It was great. It was such a great moment.
How old is Elijah now?
Elijah's 7.5.
7.5.
So he kind of has that like bookstore haul envy, and I come in and I'll come back with 3 or 4 things or the library. If I go to the library and pick up our holds without him, he gets really weird about it because he likes that, like, we come into the house with a big triumphant bag, like we're, pillagers coming back from the, from the villages. Yeah, he's like, where'd you get those? Like the library. Oh, not fair. So yeah, I'm raising a little me, I think, in some ways. I hope.
7 is the start of the fun years, I think.
Yeah.
7 to 10 is my favorite kid years.
He's super into stuff and he's curious and he wants to like just absorb things. It's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
So much fun.
All right. So we gave a teaser on pacing with both of the novels that we're reading. This is going to be fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So pacing.
Do we want to define it?
Yes. Pacing is the speed of the story. And it changes, or it should change throughout the course of the story. And the way you change the space around the words, I guess, the way you change that is by slowing down with description,
right,
or dialogue, or internal dialogue. The way you speed it up is to write, shorter sentences, skipping over things, like we talked about in some other podcast episode about the chase scene. If someone's chasing you through the forest, you're not going to talk about the type of leaves that are on this tree.
Long, languid, reflective thoughts on the last time you saw an oak in full bloom.
Right. Yeah. That's not going to happen unless you have reason to slow down because it's been so intense. Right. And there's a moment where the pursued is now hiding and can catch their breath.
Right.
Then there can be a moment where you're purposefully slowing things down so that the reader can take a breath. I went to a movie one time. I don't even remember what it was. It was one of the Blade movies or something. I went with whoever I was dating at the time. And it was so intense. And like the entire 100 minutes, I had like white knuckled, holding onto the chair and heart racing. And I left the theater like feeling physically ill because I had so much, I just felt gross. You need to pace that, move.
It's like those John Wick movies with Keanu Reeves. Like it starts, it's like somebody drops the go button and it hits the go button and then it's just on. It's like a nonstop fight. And the only conversations are like, why are we fighting? Here's why we're fighting. Fight again. It just, the pace is so white knuckle. I don't know how people watch that stuff. I really don't.
Yeah. We need to have it slower.
So pacing also, pacing is the way the narrative unfolds on one end from cover to cover. It also is how a series unfolds from first to last. And then it is like you were talking about, it's in the scene as well. It's this is a reflective scene, this is an intent scene. It's like, how is your book, rising and falling in those scenes?
The sine waves of the book.
Right. I have someone in my writers group that's always talking about, one of his first comments is always, this scene, like, it's good to put this scene after this scene at this point in the book. He's always talking about those things. And it's really interesting when you look at the book from that 10,000 foot view of like, am I giving the reader enough of all the elements in the story in a balanced way?
And the transitions between those fast and slow scenes shouldn't be too jarring.
Right.
I mean, I imagine that, the transitions can be tricky. If you do have this big, huge chase scene or something, and then the next chapter, they're at home doing the laundry, whatever, like there has to be some kind of like, obviously time has changed, time has passed.
Right. Chase has to end.
What's that?
Well, the chase has to end.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but why are we going into the laundry scene now? Right. Like, what is the motivation for that? And that's something you hear in screenwriting, the motivation. Are those cuts and changes motivated, or are they abrupt? And I see that a lot in my own first drafts, right? Where I'm like, I went from this to this. I went from discovering a clue to something else that is like, we're back to looking for clues again. And you're not giving that character the time to process. And I think it's especially poignant in like mystery or something, right? Where if it's investigative and somebody's finding something, you have to give them time to process it, to show like that they understand what this clue does, right? If you find the bloody candlestick, you have to stop and think about it. So those are different paces. There's the creeping around, a lot observational pace, and then there's the sitting in the car looking at the clue, thinking about the clue, what it means. And that's a challenge.
Yeah. And so what do you think about flashbacks?
Oh boy.
Flashbacks can really slow down the pace and take a reader out of the story. Right. But it's also sometimes, per story, of course, very necessary. So how do you manage that?
How do I personally manage that? Oh man, I wouldn't know how to tell anybody how to manage flashbacks, because I am a sucker for them. And I like everything from the mini flashback to the narrative based flashback, I guess you could call that. I think what you have to, and this again comes from Gary in my writers group, who's always talking about the need for, that investigative scene, the chase scene, the reflective scene, having that balance. Well, reflective scenes are different for every character, right? So I think if your character is someone who's, and my character happens to be this, like somewhat stuck in the past, somewhat resolving the past in the present, that's what he's doing. It makes flashbacks, and I think I probably subconsciously, designed him this way so I could work in flashbacks as a part of my narrative. But I think that if it's a natural part of that reflective element in your narrative, then it works. I think something, if you want to talk about what really, to me, blows the pacing with flashbacks, is when the writer tries to make this really well-rounded story, right? Where that flashback comes as a, he sits back in the car, he looks at the keychain from, that has the emblem of his high school, and then we get this, whole well-rounded narrative, that has an arc. And I think knowing that a flashback naturally in psychology is really just kind of is a flash. You're getting a piece of a story. You're not getting the full context. You're not getting the, everything
dialogue
that goes into
and
that.
Sensory details. Yeah. So you can have little bits of both of those, but yes, a flash. I think that the smaller flashbacks are better, because as a reader, I don't want to be invested in character A or character A storyline, whatever. And then we flash back to a different time, and we're there so long that I get invested in that storyline. Right. And now I'm back to the first one. And then I don't know, it's like, it's almost like I'm partial to stories with one POV, because
Right.
I do get so invested in the character. I don't want to go to someone else. Come on, I want to stay with this story. And so those
Right.
flashbacks, the long ones like you're talking about, that's kind of the effect it has on me. Like I don't want to be bustled around unless you can do it artfully, and then the
Right.
transition isn't so abrupt, and you're okay. I think in terms of, I heard this once at this is very in the weeds, very logistic here. So when you are going in to a flashback and going out of a flashback, you need to use the word had.
Right.
So for the first, for two sentences,
Oh
which
yeah, I've heard you said this
indicates,
before. Yeah.
yeah, it indicates you're going into a flashback, and then you do the same thing reversing out of it. You switch the tense so that the reader has that gentle, like, oh yes, we're going back into this other world. And
Right.
it's just way less jarring.
I think it's wise to just, and this might be hard to do because it might just be difficult for you to do, but I think if you want to, like, how to do a flashback, like find one in your life, right? Try to look at a moment when you are having a conversation with someone. How much of that memory are you really, when you flash back to it? Not when you're telling a story. When I am sitting at the bar and I'm telling some crazy story, that's different because there's a setup and payoff. But our psychology doesn't work that way. Like if you
Right.
say something, I might flash to a moment. And in the moment that I'm having that flashback, I'm only having that. I might later, after we're done with this podcast and in my day, reflect on the whole story because I'll have time. But I think it's just, you got to pay attention to natural psychology and realize that if you're in that point of view with that character, unless it's a truly traumatic, absorbing thing,
Like PTSD, sort of, you're in another world. Yeah.
Yeah. And odds are you're not confronting that often in a story. And if you are confronting that, your reader is going to know that this big flashback is motivated. So, yeah.
I had a thought and I forgot it. I liked what you said about the flash, the picture. Oh, I know what it was. So this is a pet peeve. This is an editor pet peeve.
Okay.
This seems to go with this conversation, so I'm just going to put it out there. So I really don't like it when writers when they see things, when they hear things, or when they remember things, like they use the word John remembered the day when, or John looked at his hands and saw, like, that totally pulls the reader out of the narrative. Right. And now we are seeing a person, seeing a thing.
Right.
And the whole purpose is to keep the character, or keep the reader as the character, in the scene with what's going on. So you don't have to use those filler words, really. They're just really, they just jump out at you. So when you do a flashback, I don't know, especially if you're talking about the kind, the psychology kind, where you're just flashing really quickly. You don't need to say Melville remembered the time when his dad, whatever, you just slip into that and then slip right back out of it. And that's natural. And the reader is going to feel that more authentically.
Right. And I think that's a lot, if you don't want to break pacing, if you want to keep and you talk about getting jarred out of a scene, and that's what you're trying, that ruins pacing more than anything, right? The minute you're pulled out of a scene and you have to reorient. But I think that finding a sense cue for that flashback is big. I was just rewriting one where Melville, he's in his house and he's thinking about his dad, but it starts when he hears the sound that is when his dad used to take his shoes off and drop them on the floor, and that drops him into this memory, and it's just of his dad taking his shoes off, and that's that. The temptation, and it's funny we were talking about this because when I was working on that scene on Tuesday, the temptation is to, because it's a moment, right? For me as a writer, that's a great character moment, and I love that little flashback. The temptation is, well, I'm going to build this out. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to build a little story around it. In that moment, you have to discipline yourself. In that moment, I'm in act 2. I'm still gathering clues. The bigger, more psychologically enthralling flashbacks come later as they reveal, as they start to resolve, plot points and story points. But so I think that you also, as a writer, have to be, it's you just got to be accept that less is more. That maybe you can just enjoy that moment for more than it is, and let the reader get the snippet, I guess. I wanted to build a whole story around that drop shoe. I had this whole thing going, and I had to restrain myself because it was like, no,
you can give that to your readers, to your mailing list.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do with those. Or there's just the satisfaction of knowing the character that well. And I think sometimes I like that.
Yeah.
I like that feeling.
So something came up I was in a book club earlier this week, and we were talking about the different types of memoir and how you've got the narrative arc one, but then also like this linked thematic essays, and that sometimes those are really satisfying. But the problem with those sometimes is it gives essays are nice and complete. And so it gives the opportunity for the reader to put down the book then. And then of course, once it's down, there's no guarantee they'll ever pick it back up again. So with the novel that I just read, Meet Me in Another Life, this does tie into pacing.
Right. Oh no.
It was written, so they meet in other lives. And so every chapter is a complete life that they spend together. So every chapter that you turn to is a completely different, I mean, they're the same characters, but they're different people to each other. And so that was, in terms of pacing, that was kind of a mixed bag for me, because it was a quick read. It finished. It was a place I could put the book down.
Right.
I was invested in the characters,
right,
Thora and Santi, but they were different. I mean, they weren't different people. They were, it was like they were living different lives. So they had the core of them was still there. So I was still invested in them and in their relationship, but it changed so much. From life to life, it was, it caught my interest, and things happened, and it was riveting in that sense, but it took me a while to reconcile that, okay, this is the way I'm going to read this book. And it ended up being amazing and awesome, but I didn't know how it was going to like come together at the end. And make sense. And I was reminded when you were talking this morning about Cloud Cuckoo, how you had this big long scene that was probably, I don't know if it was a slow scene. It was description.
It was it was a slow scene, but it was so rich with like intrigue, like what was going to happen. It's a couple of soldiers that end up they're fighting in the Korean War, and they end up in a prison camp, and it's like, it's riveting in that, like, these guys they're struggling to survive, and you're seeing the difficulty and just staying alive every day. And so you're riveted by that, but nothing really happens. It's the basics every day of a person stuck in a prison camp. It has a climax. There's an interesting climax to that scene. One that doesn't, I could say it's not giving anything away, but I don't know, because I don't know how it links to the whole plot. I guess that's sort of where the pacing in a book like that gets me, is that, so the scene, okay, I'll say what happens. Like at the end of the scene, the main character, Omir, ends up, he has the trust of the prison guards. He ends up having this job where he's supposed to get somebody out of isolation. So he goes to this, like, goes out, finds this prisoner that they've put in isolation for 20 days. And he opens up the, basically it's described like a tomb, like this guy's like dead on his feet, but he opens up the tomb and he finds this guy. And there's all this Greek writing, and that's the linkage in the story, is that it kind of all goes back to this, it traces back to the Ottoman Empire. And there's all this, like, there's a play that maybe links everything together called Cloud Cuckoo Land. And so you're always looking for the linkage. You're looking, there's this linkage, and you're looking for it in everything. And so then the characters, like, because he's written in this script that Omir recognizes, they end up having a conversation about sort of some philosophy that Omir learned in school. That's sort of like why that scene is there. But so what's disorienting for me is that, like, I'm reading this great scene, I get to this climax. It's this sort of intellectual climax more than anything in this book in particular. It's an intellectual climax. It's not like an emotional one, because I don't know what the arc of that character is. Like, I really not, and that's kind of the literary element of the story, right? It's just, it's very artful, it's very daring, but it's not cohesive. You know, it's not, I think we're getting conditioned to like the page turner is what we want. The page turner for like action, not the page turner for like thought. I don't know. It's hard to know why you're there. And when I have to pick up the next chapter, I do this every time I pick this book up. I have to pick it up and say, why? Okay, I just shifted from Korea in 1950 to a space station 500 years from now. Why?
Yeah, so I think that linkage you were talking, or those touchstones for flashbacks, or, you know, all of these elements in story that we can use as tools to keep the reader engaged and following, so that they can, you know, it's a clue. It really is. It's a touchstone. Right. It's a clue. It's a, how does this link together? Oh yeah, it's that. Right. And okay, that's why I'm going to keep reading, and eventually there was going to be a great payoff.
Right.
We hope, you know, whenever we pick up any book, that there is going to be a payoff. There is going to be that satisfaction at the end, and that it, yeah.
But okay, and you just hit on something. When I read Cloud Atlas, right? So Cloud Atlas is a very similar
David Mitchell.
narrative.
Okay.
Yeah, where it's the lives, the sort of like butterfly lives that, you know, rise and then fall. The climax of that book for me happened when I said, like, oh, I get it. I get what the author's trying to do. That to me is not a satisfying climax. That for me, that's like, I got the trick of the book, and and it was, I mean, I enjoyed the book as I was reading it, but the fact that I got to the end of it and said, the only thing what I got out of it was I got the gag. That's a little hard for me. That's actually really hard for me, because what I want to get is what happened to the character, why that mattered, why that story is meaningful. What does that have to do with my life, or what does that have to do with, yeah.
And so what that has to do with pacing is that you want the pacing to be such that the read is comfortable, almost not even noticeable, you know, until you get to the end and you're like, wow. So getting our readers to finish the books and stay engaged has a lot to do with pacing. I remember reading a book years and years ago. It was not in my wheelhouse. Like, it was a genre that I didn't normally read. The writing style was a little sophomore, you know, it was just a little bit.
Right.
And yet I was completely
a little
riveted. Bit. I don't know how to say that.
For those not watching,
it wasn't very it wasn't Cloud Cuckoo Land.
No, probably not.
But anyways, I could not put it down. And those books that you like take a day to read, or a day and a half to read, if you have other obligations, actually.
Right. You don't have the hot tub dinner, right? You know, palette with the dogs.
Every page you're just turning, because you can't not know what's going to happen next. And so I think that was kind of a light bulb moment for me as a writer, because, you know, I grew up reading like the flowery language and you know, I enjoyed that. And so as a writer, sometimes that becomes my own block, you know, like I'm so intent on making this beautiful that I forget about the other elements of story, and then I can put the beautiful in later, but what really needs to hold the book together, you know, that needs to go in first. And so, yeah, it was good. That's good pacing. If you need to turn the page, if the chapter ends and you have to start the next one, that's good pacing.
I had that like 2 years ago. My son and I picked up a book called Miss Bixby's Last Day, and it's about like a heart-rending story. I would say it's my favorite book that I've read in the last 10 years. I couldn't put it down. It's about three boys, and they find out their teacher is in the hospital she's sick, she's got cancer. And these three boys sort of go on this mission to I'm getting chills just talking about it. Like they go on this mission to bring their teacher like something she loves. And throughout this story, and it's three, fourth grade boys trying to get on a bus and buy a gift and get a bottle of wine. There's all this like kid antics. So then every other chapter is this like kid, like they're trying to buy a bottle of wine. It's hilarious. And it's how they do it is great. But then it's also like juxtaposed with a chapter about why that student is doing this, like why they love Miss Bixby so much that she did something special for each one of those kids. And so that to me was the ultimate, like the best pacing I've ever read in a book, because I couldn't put it down, and I would keep my kid up and ask my wife, I am like 7:30 we read books, 8:00 lights out. I was keeping him up because I couldn't put it down either, and she'd come home, my wife would come home from work. What are you doing? It's a great book. Let's just keep going. Because it gave you that, like, talk about rise and flow, rhythm. It had a rhythm. Like I laughed, and then I got touched, and then to set up the next print, it just worked.
Let's bring that up in the conversation. So the pacing, we keep talking about like making you turn the page. So the balance of it, we didn't talk about emotion at all. So being able to put in emotion at the right place at the right time. And I mean, if we're really going to get in the weeds again, and be all robotic about it, our purpose as a reader is to elicit emotion as our writer to elicit emotion in the reader.
Right.
And so, that does sound manipulative, and it kind of
is. It is. In a good way.
In a good way, for the benefit and the education or entertainment of the reader. But yeah, coming up with what emotion, and you can do this at the scene level too. Like when you plot out your scene, what emotion do I want my character have in this scene when they leave it? Okay. How am I going to do that? What techniques can I use to get this emotion, going for the reader and putting that in the scene?
Yeah. And I think emotional pacing is like, most people don't even in like romance, like you need to have different emotions throughout. There's anticipation, there's disappointment, there's satisfaction, like, and those things have to escalate as the story goes. In a mystery, the character has to, be intrigued. They have to be curious. They have to be bold. They have to be investigative. So I think that knowing where all those things are and escalating them as you go keeps the pace moving. Because if it was just, again, like we went back to the beginning, you watching Blade white knuckled for 100 minutes isn't going to work, because that's one emotion the entire time. Nobody wants that. That's just, nobody can read that.
When you are trying to put punctuation in a sentence and knowing where the comma goes, it often goes when you take a breath.
Right.
So if you're reading a sentence out loud and you can't get to the end of the sentence without gasping, it's too long, or, you need some punctuation in there, or it needs to be 2 sentences or something. So in your novel, in your narrative arc, I think there needs to be places where you breathe,
Right.
And that's where you would naturally change the emotion to give the reader a break. In my grief memoir, that's grief's heavy stuff, and it's hard to get through. So it has to be interspersed with spaces where it's not so dark, where you make the reader even laugh. Sometimes that dark humor is really necessary, or it doesn't have to be dark humor, but it
has to be something.
Has to be something.
This is what this is the stuff, subplots, right? Where you have that other thing the person is doing. Like in this current novel I'm writing, it's a romance. Melville is investigating something, but he's also falling in love. And so that gives me an opportunity to break up a bit of that narrative of that investigation and suspend that storyline a little bit before, while he's fallen in love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you can actually, I say that and then I sort of roll my eyes at myself, because in movies and scripts, in movie scripts, it's always like the love story is always the B story, right? It's always the characters, unless it's James Bond, like the characters genuinely like finding connection with another person while they're trying to solve the storyline, the main storyline, unless it's a romance, and then it's like probably something else. But yeah.
All right. So takeaways.
Oh boy, there's a lot.
There's a lot, and they do seem kind of disjointed, which is the opposite of pacing. But yeah, having natural places in the manuscript to breathe, to change emotion, having ups and downs that feel natural, not like jarring.
Right. And then when you get down to scene level, you're talking about, like we described, if you're in a running away from something scene, you're not taking a long time to describe the setting. You maybe did that before the person was in pursuit. Maybe they enter the forest, they look around, they notice something, then a twig snaps. The writing has to replicate the psychological state of the character.
Absolutely.
Because if the character's running, it's fast. If the character's not, it's slow.
Yeah. And so you can do that, like you said, at the scene level with description or not, and then also with the sentence size, with the chapter size too. If it's a fast chapter, like the scene can be short if it has all the elements to it. Right.
And I think also if you're talking about series, which we didn't touch on, and I think it's harder to quantify, but when we talk about like books and series, like people will talk about this one was good and this one was different and this one was different, because
this one series or this one book?
The book in the series, like they'll talk about how like book one, like the Wheel of Time series, book one sets the stage, book two builds into book three, which acts as kind of a mini climax in the first part of the series. There's going to be that in a series too. Not everything is Fellowship of the Ring where everybody gathers, spends the whole book gathering. So you have to be aware that, in a series, it is sort of like a nesting doll, right? Where you've got like a book is a series of chapters that go in this arc. Well, so is a series, right? The first one sets the stage, the second one, deepens the stakes, and it's going to change throughout. You can't always have this, the same rising action, and every book doesn't accelerate the story.
What about the series that doesn't have the overarching? What if
kind
it's
of like a Jack Reacher kind of thing where I can just say I don't read a lot of series like that, which it's just sort of like the recurring character. My only reference to that is James Bond. And I think that with James Bond, the way they do those series well is that the character is the same, right? Jack Reacher, James Bond, the same character every time they step on stage. It's just the stage is always different. One time it's Russia going after these gangsters, in Thailand it's pirates. I think at that point you just have to be a master of setting. You have to be a master of like creating new villains, and probably I don't know if Jack Reacher has like a love story in it at all. Like maybe there's like a woman.
I haven't read any of that. I don't know.
I hear people talking about it, like, so I'm only going off of what I've heard people say. But I think if you're going to do those kind of things, you're treating it kind of like just like, it's a monster of the week thing, right? Different setting, different villain, different B story, and then go. And if you can create,
so it's almost a standalone. You're saying they're standalone novels, basically, but in the same world.
With a recurring character, right? Just he or she has like some amazing ability to get from Thailand to Russia, and, some
it works in the story world.
Right. Yeah. There are secret. That's why those people are always secret operatives. You don't have to explain. They opened something. It said be in Bangkok in 48 hours, and then they go, because they have limitless money, and they have, they don't have to go through clearance or anything.
All right. Is there anything else you want to touch on about pacing?
Well, I don't know. I think if anybody has any questions or comments or ideas about this, I would drop them in the comments.
Yeah.
And
I'd be happy to hear. Yeah.
I would love to know what people think about it or their struggles. I guess if I did have one final thing to say is pacing is probably not going to come on your first draft. If it is coming on your first draft, you're rare. I feel like pacing, yeah, I think pacing really comes from, I got the story done, it's out, it's there. And now that second draft is usually like reorienting the elements to make the pace work, make it work as a book instead of a series of scenes. That's what my sense of it. If your process is like mine.
Yeah, good thought. All right. Well, thanks for talking with me about pacing, and
thanks for having me.
Happy writing.
Thanks for talking to me about pacing.
I know, it's so exciting. All right. Happy days. Happy week. We'll see you next time.
Good writing, everybody.
Bye now.